Delighted to welcome Labour's Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary, to the show right now, live for us from Westminster on College Green. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, look, if we could start, please, to talk about the pensions triple lock. Angela Rayner, yesterday speaking at the TUC Congress, refused repeatedly to answer questions about whether or not Labour would keep the triple lock. Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride, the man in charge of it right now, he says it's unsustainable long term. Do you agree? Does your party agree? Would you get rid of it?
Well, there's a simple principle here, which is if the government wants to change their position on the triple lock, which they stood on at the last election, as did Labour, then they've got to go back to the country and seek a fresh mandate, because no one voted for Rishi Sunak, not even Conservative Party members voted for Rishi Sunak. In fact, they rejected him. So if he wants to break his manifesto promise, he needs to seek a fresh mandate from the people. And as for Labour, as I say, we've committed to the pension triple lock because we've wanted to make sure pensioners don't get left behind and we don't see rising pensioner poverty in our country. As for the next manifesto, we are being cautious about setting out spending commitments this far out from an election, because as the breaking news on the economy shows, things are getting worse in many respects, not better. That makes the choices much harder, and we want to be able to go into a manifesto that's fully costed, fully funded, and people can be 100% sure that Labour can deliver. So I wouldn't read too much beyond that into Angela Rayner's caution yesterday. She's quite right to say that on this, as with everything else, unless it's fully costed and fully funded, it's not yet Labour policy.
So you're saying the Tories should
visiting that close to the election.
The Tories should remain committed to it because that was in their election manifesto. Boris Johnson was the then Prime Minister, or then leader, who was elected to deliver that manifesto. But Labour won't commit to it right now, and it's very unlikely whether, well, we'll find out whether the Tories commit to it. Isn't the reality is that both major parties are desperate for the other one to drop that commitment, so you can quietly drop it as well, because it is unsustainable?
Well, we certainly want the government to keep their promise to pensioners that they made at the last election for the entirety of the Parliament, because they didn't say we're going to keep the triple lock unless things become a bit choppy. We're going to keep the triple lock unless we happen to crash the economy. We're going to keep the triple lock unless we've decided we've got other priorities.
Last time I looked, the only people who crashed the economy were the Labour Party in 2008.
Oh, where have you been, Julia? Don't be daft. You know, you must have seen
lockdowns crashed the
disaster.
Lockdowns crashed the economy, mate. You guys were fully in support. You were standing cheering, saying more, sooner, longer.
It was the kamikaze budget that crashed the economy.
Interest rates would have gone up
a year ago, and we are paying a
that premiership was a disaster. 49 days of it, but the pension, there's no doubt at all. Pensions will still be in the state they're in. The health service will still be in the state it's in. Our schools will still be in the state it's in, with rack, crumbling concrete. Defence will be in the same state it's in. People's mortgages will still have gone up. We know interest rates are going to be pushed up by the Bank of England. You know that. Everyone knows that.
Well, I don't accept the sort of the inevitability of the misery that our country is currently in, or the political choices made by any number of Conservative Prime Ministers, Chancellors, Health Secretaries, Education Secretaries, take your pick. I mean, one thing I will say for Gillian Keegan is, you know, putting a potty language to one side. I think she kind of had a point when she said that her predecessors have been sat on their backsides not doing anything. It doesn't just apply to former education secretaries, it applies to former health secretaries, former chancellors and former Conservative Prime Ministers too. This is not a good record after 13 years of Conservative government, and I'd happily do a compare and contrast with 13 years of Labour government. We didn't get everything right, but my goodness, we had a longer list of achievements under our belt at this point than the Conservatives have.
OK, well, look, let's talk about what you would do to help the economy. And Angela Rayner was talking about her cast-iron commitment to the TUC to strengthen the hand of the trade unions within the first 100 days of a Labour government. How is that going to help the economy?
Well, I think one of the reasons why we have a low growth, low productivity economy is because we also don't create the conditions in which the economy can grow, whether that's government working in partnership with business and industry to make the right long-term decisions for our country that brings jobs and investments here, whether that's through the energy industry, more nuclear, more renewable energy that would create jobs, and high-quality jobs here. I think it's about buying, making, selling more here in Britain, a key plank of Labour's policy. And it's also about treating our workforce fairly to get the best out of those people, to make sure they've got decent wages, terms and conditions, because that's the injustice of where our country is today. I mean, we often talk about our country being the 5th richest economy in the world. I mean, that's just not true when you look at a per capita, a per person basis. At the moment, Britain's looking increasingly like a poor country with some rich people in it, and that's not a good thing. We are all better off when we are all better off, and a Labour government wants to work in partnership with business and industry and with the workforce to get our economy motoring again, to get growth back into the economy so that we can invest in our public services without having to hike up taxes any more than they already are under the Conservatives.
I mean, it all sounds great. Let's all start cheering. I'm still none the wiser as to how it's actually going to be done, because at the end of the day, you're going to inherit, as Labour left the Tories with in 2010, with no money left. There's no money, there's massive debt. We spend more money servicing the interest rate on our debt than we spend on education in this country. You know, there is no cash. We've got an absolute crisis in our public services. Broken Britain, nothing works. Half our civil servants sitting on their backsides working from home. How on earth are you going to solve all of those problems?
Well, I think in the way you've described the country's problems, Julia, I think you've set out why it's really important that at the next election people give change a chance, and why it's really important that the Labour Party is making some pretty hard-headed choices about our priorities and where we choose to spend. I mean, you know, I've spent a lot of the last 6 months, as have other Labour politicians, coming on programmes and ruling some things out that I know in my heart as a Labour politician I'd like to do, but I'm not convinced at this stage the country could afford to do. And that's so that when we go into the election with a fully costed, fully funded manifesto, people can have confidence in it. But the choices are also about making sure that our country makes the wise decisions, the wise investments that gets growth back into our economy. And if you take energy as a really good example of this, you know, why is it we've got rising bills? Why is it that people's, you know, that we're going through the roof in terms of our bills at the moment? Well, it's because we are too reliant on the international energy markets. We're too reliant on foreign dictators. We get caught in the global headwinds. If we were investing in our own domestic energy production, we would create more jobs,
more wind and sun, and everything would be fine.
Its energy security back. And
it's so painful, Wes.
Well.
It's so painful.
It's a mix. It's a mix.
It's a mix, yeah, but the trouble... My audience could literally give the response to you. They've heard it so many times. If we're paying double for our energy, which is what we have to do by having the backup of nuclear or gas to back up the unreliable wind and sun, you end up paying more for unreliable energy, and that's why we end up being reliant on foreign markets. And when you tell companies that you're going to be taxing them to the hilt and you're going to be difficult for them to invest in North Sea oil and gas, and you won't allow us to frack, that's what means we're reliant on imports.
Well, I don't think that fracking is the answer. That we need to do that.
It's been the answer for America.
Right energy mix.
They don't have energy costs like we have. They've been fracking their gas underneath their ground.
But I do think we can get our energy mix right in this country that puts us on the right path to giving Britain its energy security back, creating jobs in good industries in the process, reindustrialising those parts of the country that have suffered massive deindustrialisation over the years, where people will talk fondly about, like, take Teesside as a really good example. A place that used to be the beating heart of our industry could be the beating heart of Britain's energy security. But you've got to have governments making the wise choices, the wise investments that can create jobs, cut bills and give Britain its energy security back. That's the kind of strategic thinking and partnership with business that we need to get growth back into the economy.
Well, if and when it happens, I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time talking about it if and when you are actually in the cabinet, not the shadow cabinet. Can I ask you about this new report from the Institute for Public Policy Research? It was at one point Tony Blair's favourite think tank. He's still very much influential in Labour circles, as we know, and half of his old aides and MPs are now back in the shadow cabinet. We've got the issue with long-term sick. 2.6 million people in this country, a far higher percentage of working-age people than in most other comparable nations who are long-term sick, waiting on operations. But a lot of them are obesity, it's other health problems related to lifestyle. What do we need to do about them?
Well, look, there isn't an answer to Britain's economic crisis that doesn't involve tackling Britain's NHS crisis too. We have got to get people back to work, and so many of those people are out of work because they are sick and also tired of waiting on very long, record-high NHS waiting lists. And that is why I think it is outrageous that today Rishi Sunak is doing another one of his cynical photo ops, getting the great and the good of the NHS round the cabinet table to say, look at me, I'm talking to people.
Well, the Prime Minister shouldn't be talking to NHS
when the striking
bosses?
Doctors... No, he should be getting the doctors round the table who are going on strike and thrashing out a deal, because he's not going to get his waiting list down.
Remind me again what Labour would give the striking doctors.
Strikes.
Remind me, are you going to give them the 35% to get them back to work?
No, we can't do 35%. It's not affordable. But what we have said is we would be willing to negotiate. And just in recent weeks, I have met with the BMA, I've met with the consultants and the doctors, listened to the range of issues that they would be willing to negotiate on. And I feel that a deal is there for the taking. But the government, the Health Secretary, hasn't met the doctors since March. What on earth is he doing if he is not meeting with the people who are on strike in unprecedented industrial action and seeing the waiting list rising simultaneously? What is the point of this Prime Minister if he is not showing leadership and knocking heads together in the middle of this crisis?
All right.
Less photo ops from Rishi Sunak, please, more action.
All right, we will leave it there. No, you've got another interview to get to. Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary.